Hello folks and welcome back to another action movie recommendation. And seeing that it is the Christmas season, I thought I'd review an action movie that's Christmas related. And of course that can only mean one thing. We're going to be talking Die Hard. Now granted, only the first two are set on Christmas, but hey, who cares? It's only proper that I review the whole series. But before I start, let's talk about Bruce Willis for a little bit. Bruce Willis is an unusual case as far as his start in action films goes. Unlike Stallone and Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis had no history of being a bodybuilder, athlete, or martial artist. Willis built his foundation on TV, making appearances in shows like Miami Vice, Twilight Zone, but more famously, Moonlighting, which had him playing a wise-ass private detective. I guess this caught the attention of Hollywood producers who thought that he would be perfect for an action hero. And they were right. Willis's first action movie debut, Die Hard, proved to be a monster success for him. With his wise-ass attitude and everyman persona, he instantly became a hit with action fans, and more action roles followed. Bruce Willis has had a very successful career over the years, but lately he hasn't exactly been the nicest guy, alienating his fans and co-stars alike. Whether it's acting weird or uptight in interviews or making film shoots difficult for crew members, he has definitely left a negative impression on his friends and fans alike. But anyways, let's get down to business, kicking it off with the 1988 action classic Die Hard. Yippie Ki Yay Motherfucker. Bruce Willis is New York detective John McClane. He has been invited to a Christmas party by Holly, his ex-wife. The party is taking place at her work, a giant office building called Nakatomi Plaza. Things get off to a rough start, however, when McClane and Holly reunite, and it ends in an argument, leaving John McClane to sit in his room all by himself, while his wife leaves to attend to the other guests. However, amidst the partying, an international terrorist group crashes the party, led by the sinister and evil Hans Gruber. Everyone is taken hostage except for John McClane, who manages to escape undetected. Armed with only a handgun, it's now up to John McClane to somehow save his wife and the hostages. Die Hard is one of those films that I never appreciated when I was young. I remember distinctively my cousin being a huge fan and trying to get me into the series. But being 10 years old, I was pretty short-sighted to see the greatness of this series. I didn't fully grasp the idea of the everyman action hero until I got older. I was still into the more comic and fantasy action films of Stallone and Schwarzenegger, where it wasn't all about total realism. It wasn't until I was around 14 or 15 when I started to truly appreciate Die Hard. Bruce Willis was perfect for this role. He had the humor, charisma, and clearly gave the best physical performance he could for a role of this kind. McClane's character was clearly an everyday guy that anyone could relate to. He also had a heart. Whenever the innocent people died, he expressed shock and emotional pain. You could clearly see he cared for the safety of people in danger, and that instantly makes him likable. Next up we have Bonnie Bedelia, who plays Holly, and she does really well in her role. She's kind but also a fast thinker and cunning when in a dangerous situation. And she even had the guts to face up to the head honcho of the terrorist group, Hans. And speaking of which, Alan Rickman does a splendid job at playing the cold, sinister and witty main villain Hans Gruber. He just exudes evil, from his vicious actions to his cold and calculated decisions, and he just does it with seemingly no regret or remorse. Hans has often been put in top 10 lists for greatest movie villains of all time. Rickman's character of Hans has also been very influential in action cinema. Many action films that came out after Die Hard more or less had their own rendition of Hans Gruber, and that influence still persists to this very day. However, aside from Hans Gruber, we also get his right-hand man, Karl, played by the late great Alexander Godunov. Karl can only be described in two words: cold and psychotic. He has a very short temper, and whenever he's silent, he never looks relaxed. It's like he's always thinking every time, and occasionally explodes into fits of rage when something goes wrong. He is clearly unstable and makes for a very intimidating henchman. Now there are a lot of memorable supporting characters in this film also, such as Ellis, played by Hart Bochner, a typical 80s businessman who is addicted to cocaine and will do anything to save his own ass. Then we have William Atherton playing Richard Thornburg, a scummy reporter, and his character is more or less a continuation of the character Walter Peck in Ghostbusters. We also have Reginald VelJohnson playing Sergeant Powell, who keeps giving John McClane some much needed hope and encouragement, and he is likable for those reasons alone. And finally we have the two FBI agents known as the Johnsons. They both share the same last name of Johnson but have no relation. They are played by Robert Darby and Grand L. Bush, and their characters are basically a bunch of assholes. They just show up and try to take control of the hostage situation, but their methods are highly questionable, but yet for some reason they're just memorable. The movie was directed by John McTiernan, who previously had directed the Arnold Schwarzenegger sci-fi action epic Predator, and McTiernan proved himself once again capable of directing an action movie. McTiernan just knows how to build suspense and make every action scene an event. And there's lots of moments where you just yell, "Holy shit!" There's lots of moments like that. There's a great shot in the film where one of the terrorists gets shot in the legs, but it's not enough to just show him get shot in the legs. Oh no. McTiernan basically shows his kneecaps exploding in glorious slow motion as he's running. And it's one of those moments where you go, "Oh fuck, that's gotta hurt." It's something about the timing of moments like these where John McTiernan just nails it in his films every time. And Die Hard is definitely one of the best examples of this. And this film definitely stays true to its R rating. This movie is not for kids. The movie has a lot of suspense, which comes from John McClane being this one man against a whole team of armed terrorists. So he has to constantly use his wits to outsmart them. But most importantly, try to remain undetected. And being that the whole movie takes place inside an office building, 90% of the time, it provides a sense of claustrophobia, which makes we, the audience, feel more involved in the experience. So, if you really think about it, this movie comes off more as an action thriller than just a straight-up action film. But make no mistake, there is plenty of action in this movie. And of course, there's plenty of the traditional action movie one-liners in the film. And they are pure gold. Everyone loves Yippie Ki Yay Motherfucker, but my favourite line is said when John McClane is trying to call for help. And the operator on the phone says that the line is reserved for emergency calls only. And McClane responds with, "No fucking shit, lady, does it sound like I'm ordering a pizza?" I apologise for that horrible impression, but I couldn't help it. That line gets me every time. There's many more great lines in this film, and overall, I love it. I can't see any problems with this movie. And if there is any problems, I haven't noticed them because of how good everything else is. And that's a sign of a good movie, when you don't notice the flaws. Die Hard was a financial success, grossing $140 million on a $28 million budget. Critically, the movie received positive reviews, and although Roger Ebert was not a fan of the film, which is fine, everyone is entitled to an opinion, but his reason for hating it was because of one character in which he found annoying, and it ruined the whole film for him. And honestly, I personally think that's the dumbest reason ever. If one character ruins a whole movie for you, then I don't really know what to say. I mean, people think that there's never any annoying characters, or there should never be any annoying characters in movies. I totally disagree, because in the real world, there are some really annoying people. And, you know, I know this is a movie, but why can't we portray that in movies? I mean, there's no law against it. But overall, if you ask me, I'll tell you that Die Hard is a classic action thriller that should not be missed and is a perfect Christmas action movie. And it's the only one I can think of. So, I have to give this the perfect score. 5 out of 5 stars. Check it out.
Hey Carmine, let me ask you something. What sets off the metal detectors first? The lead in your ass or the shit in your brains?
A full 2 years later in 1990, Die Hard 2, Die Harder blasted its way onto our screens. Bruce Willis and most of the original cast were back, but director John McTiernan was not. In the director's chair this time around was Rennie Harlin, who was fresh off the success of his last film, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. Harlan had not directed action before, but he was more than eager to prove himself in this genre, and it definitely shows. If Die Hard 1 was a hard-edged action thriller, then Die Hard 2 was a no-holds-barred action extravaganza, with bigger stunts, a larger body count, and a higher level of violence. The plot of the film takes place a year after the events of the first film. It's Christmas Eve again, and John McClane is at Dulles Airport to pick up his wife returning from a business trip. However, McClane begins to experience deja vu when terrorists take over the airport and seize control of the command tower. And if their demands are not met, planes will start running out of fuel and come crashing down, killing many innocent people on board, including McClane's wife, who is also on one of those planes within the region. So McClane once again becomes a one-man army to take down these terrorists to save the passengers and his wife. I must confess, when I first saw Die Hard 2, I was not a big fan of it. I found it a little bland and lacking in suspense at the time, but I was also watching it on a beat-up VHS tape which I had rented, so that didn't do much to help the experience either. You really had to put up with shit like that when you watched VHS if you were borrowing them. You just never knew how bad the quality would be because so many people had rented it before. However, a few years later I ended up buying all the Die Hard movies on DVD, and I did a marathon, and I found myself enjoying Die Hard 2 a lot more than I did the first time. And I guess having seen it on better quality made all the difference in the world after all. And the more times I watched Die Hard 2, I just seem to enjoy it more. Bruce Willis is still solid as John McClane, and in this movie, he seems to be just as surprised as we are that the same thing is happening to him just a year after the events of the first film. And Willis himself is arguably more physical in this film than he was in the first one. William Sadler plays Colonel Stewart, the main villain of the film, and Sadler does an excellent job with his role, being cold and calculated. However, compared to Hans Gruber, he is probably not as sinister or as slimy as he was. But then again, Sadler is not Hans Gruber. He's a different kind of villain altogether. He's an ex-army officer gone bad. And that being said, he plays his role exceptionally well. But if you're looking for a more sinister and slimy villain, then Gruber is your man. But I give props to Sadler for doing his own thing, not to mention he is the only villain still to this day who was an actual physical threat to John McClane. The fight on the wing of the plane is proof of that, and there has not been a Die Hard villain, main villain, who has ever physically challenged John McClane to a fight. Bonnie Bedelia is back as Holly McClane, and her role this time around is slightly more minimal. But once again, she does an excellent job with what her role requires. John Amos plays Major Grant, a man leading a crack team to help catch Colonel Stewart. Amos is charismatic and does a great job in his role, but I'd rather not talk too much about his character just in case anyone who's watching this review has not seen Die Hard 2. I don't want to spoil anything, he is one of the best parts of the movie in my honest opinion. Franco Nero is Ramon Esperanza, a drug lord and dictator who is being transported to a prison and is the reason why Colonel Stewart has seized control over the airport. Stewart wants him freed. But I've got to be honest, Franco Nero doesn't have much to his character. He simply exists as a motive for the main villain to take over the airport. His acting isn't bad or anything, but like I said, his character just doesn't have much to him, other than he just smokes cigars and kills people if he has to. That's about all there is to Esperanza's character. Art Evans plays Barnes, an airport officer who helps McClane earlier in the film. Evans is okay, but doesn't provide a memorable performance or character, but at least his character is useful. Dennis Franz plays Captain Lorenzo, and I've got to be honest, his character is quite frankly annoying. He's the quintessential, arrogant and hard-headed superior officer with a foul mouth, who thinks he knows best and totally disregards helpful information or suggestions. His character is unbearably bad, but he's not the main focus of the film, thankfully enough, but I really wish they probably could have downplayed him a little bit because he's kind of grating. William Atherton reprises his role as Thornburg, the scummy reporter from the first film, and he does fine with what his role requires, but his character is still a jerk-off. But don't worry, he gets what he deserves in the end. And of course, Reginald VelJohnson returns for a brief cameo as Sergeant Powell from the first film, and he does a good job once again. for the time he's in the film. And we also get some more cameos from then newcomers Robert Patrick and John Leguizamo, both playing terrorists, so keep an eye out for those guys. Die Hard 2, in my honest opinion, is the best of the Die Hard sequels, and I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, and I know what they're going to say. Come on, Die Hard 3 is the best sequel, everyone knows that. Well, I'm sorry folks, but I beg to differ. And don't worry, I'll get to Die Hard 3 in a minute or so. But anyways, Die Hard 2 is for me the best of the sequels, for many reasons. For one, Bruce Willis and a majority of the cast do an excellent job in their roles. 2, the action level and violence is cranked up even higher and is well staged. There's a great shot of John McClane ejecting from an airplane and you get a bird's eye view shot of McClane flying up into the camera. And it's shots like these that are just pure gold, and there's plenty of them. And 3, the airport setting is really effective, and coupled with the snow, it makes for a very harsh environment for McClane to deal with, as he eventually has to leave the airport itself and head out on the runways and in the snowy fields where the terrorists are hiding. And overall, the plot has lots of twists and turns, and the movie also contains one of the most horrifying plane crashes ever filmed. It still makes my heart sink every time I see it. The movie is also both self-aware and self-contained, and you would think this is a problem, but somehow it just works. And I think it's because of the professionalism of the filmmaking and Rennie Harlin's energetic direction that makes this all work. However, the film is not without its flaws. Some of the supporting characters in this film are not the best, and the film in general lacks a lot of the suspense from the original. And the one-liners are probably not as memorable as the first film, but that's really my only criticisms on it. Overall, as a high-tech, no-holds-barred action film, Die Hard 2 delivers in spades. And to me, this is the only Die Hard film that really feels like a true sequel because it has a majority of the original cast and takes place on Christmas once again. I always thought that these films would always take place on Christmas and become known as the Christmas action movie series. But Die Hard 3 disproved that theory. When Die Hard 2 came out, it did very well financially, grossing $240 million on a $70 million budget. And it got mostly positive reviews. Siskel and Ebert even preferred it over the original. I personally wouldn't go that far with the praise, but I would definitely say that this is a great follow-up. But over the years, Die Hard 2 has been getting a lot of shit from more contemporary reviews and critics, saying it's too much like the first one, and the plot and villains sucked. Honestly, I don't understand what those people are talking about. I mean, everyone is entitled to an opinion, and I respect that. However, I don't get how people could think any of that. If anything, I find Die Hard 3 to be too much like the first film, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But first, I've got to give my rating. Die Hard 2 gets a solid 4 out of 5 from me. While not as suspenseful as the first film, it still delivers riveting action and is extremely underrated in my honest opinion.
You know your brother. He was an asshole.
Okay, now let's get on to Die Hard with a Vengeance, aka Die Hard 3. This one came out 5 years after the second film, in 1995. Bruce Willis was back, but the supporting cast from the previous 2 films were nowhere to be found. However, Die Hard 1 director John McTiernan was back in the chair. It sounded promising at first, but that was of course until I saw the film. And while I didn't hate it, I just personally found it to be an underwhelming experience, and for my money the most overrated sequel ever made. Sorry to all you Die Hard 3 fans out there, but you guys can still enjoy the movie. I'm not saying you can't. Or I'm not saying you're stupid for doing so. Go ahead, enjoy the film. You are entitled to like what you like. I'm just sharing my personal thoughts on this film and my personal experience with it. The plot for Die Hard 3 revolves around John McClane living in New York, who is now an alcoholic and has been suspended from work. That is until a bomb goes off in a department store and the NYPD get a call from a man named Simon Gruber, who wants to speak with John McClane directly. McClane responds and discovers that Simon Gruber is in fact the brother of Hans Gruber, the villain of the first Die Hard, and Gruber wants him to play a game. John McClane teams up with an electrician named Zeus, played by Samuel L. Jackson, and they both have to try and defuse the bombs before they kill many innocent people. However, while this is happening, Simon Gruber has other plans on the side. Okay, where to start with this film? Well, let's start with what I like. Bruce Willis, of course, does a fine job as always playing John McClane, and this time he is basically hungover because of all his drinking, which makes his performance all the more amusing. I mean, he's not totally smashed, but he looks like he's even more on the edge than ever before. Samuel L. Jackson is excellent as Zeus. He's funny, has lots of great dialogue, and I gotta be honest, no one can swear like he does. He does it with passion and sincerity that is rarely seen on screen. The only other actors I can think of who can pull that off are James Woods, Joe Pesci, Al Pacino, and Ken Foree. Jeremy Irons does a great job as the villain, Simon Gruber. He is sinister and very smart, but hardly original. The rest of the supporting cast who play the cops and Simon's henchmen all do fine, but for some reason, they just lack a memorable screen presence as well as screen time. However, I do like the idea of Simon having a henchwoman who is pretty much silent, but yet as deadly as a Terminator. The stunts and action in this film are well shot and directed as expected, and the musical score by Michael Kamen, who scored the previous two films, is quite possibly at its best here. However, that's all I can really say about the positives in this movie, because honestly, I found more negatives. So this brings me to what I didn't like. For one, a lot of established characters from the first two films were nowhere to be seen, particularly Bonnie Bedelia, who played Holly. Now, I know the writers and directors probably wanted to give us a fresh cast of new characters, but couldn't they have at least given us a few familiar faces? At the very least, they could have gotten Bonnie Bedelia, or hell, even give Reginald VelJohnson another cameo. But no, we are given some well-acted, well-written characters, but despite all this, they lack distinct personality, and that's why I found them unmemorable. The action scenes and stunts, while good, there's not a whole lot of them, and they are nowhere near as memorable as the action scenes in the first two Die Hards. I can list many action scenes from the first two films that are far superior. In Die Hard 1, the fight with Carl, the many shootouts through the building floors, John McClane jumping from the explosion on the roof, and then crashing through the window. Or in Die Hard 2, the fight in the luggage area, the shootout on the scaffolding, the shootouts in the snowfield with McClane having to eject from an exploding plane, the motor ski chase, and the fight on the wing of the plane. And what does Die Hard 3 have? A car chase through the streets of New York, a subway crash, a not too convincing flooded tunnel chase, and a routine finale on a ship. And that's about it, really. These scenes are well directed, but honestly they don't have much excitement for me. And that tunnel flood really looks bad due to some early CGI which looks like PS1 level graphics. They should have used miniatures or some other method, and it would have at least looked photoreal. Even the ship explosion looks ropey. Another thing I felt was a bit uninspired was the idea of making Jeremy Irons' villain the brother of the villain in the first film. To me, it seemed like a desperate attempt to have some sort of connection to the first two. They knew that Hans was a great villain, so they thought, let's just make the villain the brother, so that people will think they're watching Die Hard 1 again. And to all those people who think Die Hard 2 is a clone of the first film, think again. Not only is the villain in Die Hard 3 the brother of the villain in the first movie, his goal is exactly the same: pull off another heist. Die Hard 2 had only reoccurring characters from the first film, nothing more. But Die Hard 3 has a villain who is not only related to the villain in the first film, but he also shares the same goal. Not very original if you ask me. But granted, Simon Gruber is a good villain. But I think if he wasn't related to Hans, it would have been more effective, because the movie doesn't really make any efforts to explain why Simon specifically wants McClane to play this game. Hell, at one point McClane even says right to Simon's face, "Your brother was an asshole." Simon just laughs and agrees, so it seems like he had no real reason to call out John McClane. He could have just gotten any other cop to play his game. There wasn't a lot of drama between McClane and Simon from what I saw. And the ending was very tacky. I felt there wasn't any real payoff for Simon's villain, but that's because there was an alternate ending, and to be honest, I kinda liked the alternate ending a lot more because it was a surprise twist. but I can see why most people would have been upset with it, and that's why they chose to ditch it. But still, they could have come up with a more eventful ending battle for McClane and Simon instead of the measly helicopter finale we got. But overall, despite what I've said, I still like Die Hard 3 okay. I can watch it for sure, and it's definitely entertaining, but I don't feel it's as entertaining as the first two. The movie cost $90 million to make and grossed $366 million, so the film was a financial success. Critically, it was mixed. On Rotten Tomatoes, it gets 51%, whereas on IMDb, it gets 7.6 out of 10. Most of its praise comes from hardcore Die Hard fans, and while I myself am a huge fan of this franchise, I may just be the odd one out here for Part 3, and I don't plan on changing my opinion because I have seen Die Hard 3 several times, and it still leaves me feeling the same way, underwhelmed. However, it's not boring, and it still has some entertainment value, so overall I'd give it 2.5 out of 5. Entertaining, but not as thrilling as the first two. Overall, it's a decent movie, but it just didn't excite me that much.
Yeah, I know I'm not as smart as you guys with all this computer shit. But hey, I'm still alive, aren't I?
After Die Hard 3, it took 12 years for another Die Hard to come out. In 2007, we got Live Free or Die Hard, aka Die Hard 4.0 in Australia. Directed by Len Wiseman, and honestly, this is his only good film in my opinion. All those Underworld movies, and especially the Total Recall remake that he made, are pretty bad if you ask me. This movie got a lot of hate back in the day when it came out, particularly from the fans. They labelled it as over the top and too lightweight due to its PG-13 rating. However, financially and critically, it was well received. And I gotta be honest here, Die Hard 4 is my third favourite Die Hard film. You're probably thinking to yourself in shock, you like Die Hard 4 over Die Hard 3? You're crazy, that movie sucked. Well, sorry guys, but Die Hard 4 gave me something Die Hard 3 didn't. Excitement and fun. Sure, it was over the top, but to me that was kind of the point. It's the fourth movie in the franchise, and it's 12 years overdue. Why not have it be big and brash? And it does that well. The plot involves John McClane going up against cyber terrorists led by a guy named Thomas Gabriel, a disgruntled Department of Defense employee who wants revenge not only by stealing lots of money electronically, but destroying the entire US economy. And it's up to John McClane and a computer hacker played by Justin Long to take him down. Already, what I love about this film is how up to date it is. Well, it's been almost 10 years now since the movie came out, but its plot still works as far as I'm concerned. And we also get some great supporting characters. First, let's talk about good old John McClane. Yes, John McClane is older, but still is the likeable, tough smartass that we all know and love. And seeing him take on cyber terrorists makes it all the more exciting, because McClane is an old school cop up against new school terrorists. And this conflict between the two makes it all the more exciting. Next, we have Justin Long as McClane's sidekick, super hacker Matt Farrell. He's kind of a dick at first, but about halfway through, you warm up to him, and he becomes very useful throughout the movie. Overall, Long does a good job. I've always admired him as an actor. Then we have the main villain, Thomas Gabriel, played by Timothy Olyphant. Thomas Gabriel is, in my opinion, a very underrated villain. Lots of people seem to pick on him, saying he's lightweight and is not much of a threat. Well, I'm sorry to say this, but I disagree. Gabriel to me seems like he's very precise with what he wants to achieve and is very hands-on when in command of his team. Whereas let's say Hans Gruber, while still the best villain of this franchise, Hans always seemed to be a little too relaxed, sitting in his chair half the time. Or even his brother Simon, who in my honest opinion never really had a very strong leadership presence. But with Gabriel, he had a seriousness to him that I really admired. He may not have had a distinctively villainous voice or any swagger to him, but I think that works because it's something different. And like William Sadler in Die Hard 2, he didn't try to copy Hans Gruber or any of the other previous villains. Now, I'm not saying he's the best Die Hard villain, but I don't think he's bad. In fact, I prefer him to Simon Gruber, simply because of his original character and performance. There, I said it. Next up, we have the gorgeous Maggie Q playing Mai Lin, Thomas Gabriel's henchwoman. And again, here we have another great right-hand man for the main villain, in this case, right-hand woman. Mai Lin is smart and tough. There's a great fight scene with her and John McClane that kicks ass and is one of the best fights in a Die Hard movie. Right up there with the fight with Carl in Die Hard 1 and Colonel Stewart in Die Hard 2 on the wing of the plane. Mary Elizabeth Winstead plays John McClane's daughter. Her role is limited, but she does a decent job with what she has to work with. And even Kevin Smith makes an appearance as another hacker and provides some chuckles. The action in the movie is great. It's just so well filmed and edited that it's just crazy. Every action scene in this film is memorable, from the apartment attack to the final showdown with the fighter jet. This movie is riveting. Is it over the top? Yeah, sure, but everything else is so tightly wound that it doesn't matter. This movie just goes all out and tells you, hey, just have fun, goddammit. I only have a couple of complaints with this movie. For one, the PG-13 rating does soften the impact of the action a little bit, because after all, this series was an R-rated franchise to begin with lots of four-letter words and bloody violence. But by part 3, the violence started to tone down, and now with part 4, the foul language was softened. However, the DVD and Blu-ray release adds back the cursing and a few shots of blood. However, it was clearly added in post-production afterwards, so it seems pretty forced. And I also thought that the music in this film was lacking. Michael Kamen, who scored the first 3 Die Hard movies, had passed away by the time Die Hard 4 got into production, so they had Marco Beltrami handling the music. While Beltrami does an admirable job in the music department, but he just doesn't measure up to the distinct sounds that Kamen done in the previous films. But other than that, Die Hard 4 is an incredible action thrill ride, very worthy of the Die Hard name, and if you haven't seen it, I personally recommend giving it a watch. The movie was a financial success, grossing over $383 million worldwide on a $110 million budget, and Rotten Tomatoes gives it 82%, higher actually than Die Hard 2 and 3, so go figure. I wouldn't put Die Hard 4 over Die Hard 2, but I would definitely put it above number 3. Overall, despite its PG-13 rating, Die Hard 4 provides better action, more excitement and fun than its predecessor. 4 stars out of 5 for me. And that concludes my Die Hard reviews. I hope you all had fun watching them.
Yippie Ki Yay, Mother Russia!
Oh yeah, we have to talk about this one, don't we? Okay, let's pull out the broken glass from our feet and get onto it.
The 007 of Plainfield, New Jersey. Very nice.
After Die Hard 4, there was already talks of a Die Hard 5 going around, and it took 6 years for it to come out. In 2013, we got A Good Day to Die Hard, this time directed by John Moore, also known as John Satan's Ballsack Moore. Actually, I just call him that. Why do you ask? It's because this guy single-handedly killed the Die Hard franchise along with screenwriter Skip Woods. And I have a feeling that Skip had, forgive the pun, skipped screenwriting class because the writing in this movie is disastrous. Now, I may be sounding harsh here, but seriously, how did these two hacks end up creating a Die Hard movie? John Moore made the Omen remake, which was a waste of film, and he also directed the Max Payne movie, which was embarrassingly bad. He made some other films before those, like Flight of the Phoenix and Behind Enemy Lines, but those were pretty forgettable as well. And Skip Woods wrote 2 shitty Hitman movies, The A-Team, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and the Arnold Schwarzenegger fiasco called Sabotage. This pairing of Woods and Moore was a recipe for disaster from its very conception. Now, I'd done a reaction video to Die Hard 5 when I saw it way back when, but this time I'm going to be as clear and concise as I possibly can be. In short, A Good Day to Die Hard, or Die Hard 5 as I'll just call it, sucks ass. And that's being polite. This movie is so insultingly bad that when I walked out of the theatre, I was not a happy camper. I was downright depressed on how bad it was. The plot of this movie involves John McClane heading to Russia to find his son, Jack, played by the block of wood that is Jai Courtney. Jack is a spy and has been arrested for the assassination attempt on a corrupt Russian official that wants to sentence a political prisoner who is hiding sensitive info on the corrupt official. Eventually, Jack breaks free from his cell, and John meets up with him and they try to save the political prisoner before the official kills him. Okay, and that was in the first 20 minutes of this film. And to be honest, I was on board with this film for that first 20 minutes because the plot seemed pretty straightforward. But then the movie takes a nosedive into a mountain of shit when several subplots and side characters are introduced later on. But that's not even half this movie's problems. First of all, Bruce Willis looks so bored in this movie. Half the time it's like he's walking in his sleep. And he's not playing John McClane. Most of the time it's Bruce Willis just being Bruce Willis as well as being a dick. Gone is John McClane's humour, heart and wit, and in comes the bland expression, random punching of a civilian, and complete lack of interest. Seriously, half the time it's like Bruce is pissed off that he's in this movie, and McClane's character just doesn't seem to care about the safety of people in this movie. In the first action scene, he randomly punches out a civilian driver, steals his car, and begins to recklessly drive through traffic, endangering the lives of many innocent civilians in the process, all so he can just catch the bad guy. This is totally out of character for John McClane. And as for Jai Courtney, well, what can I say about him? He just doesn't have much personality. Seriously, the only time I liked Jai Courtney was in Jack Reacher, where he plays an emotionless henchman, but that's about it. That's all he can play as far as I'm concerned because he shows no emotion in anything he does and a complete lack of charisma. As for the other actors, I honestly don't give a shit, so I won't even bother talking about it. But I will say this, we have 3 villains in this movie, and the first one is a tap-dancing, carrot-chewing dickwad who couldn't intimidate a small child, let alone John McClane. And the next 2 villains are the definition of boring, tacked on and shoehorned in as a desperate attempt to surprise the audience. And guess what? I saw it coming a mile away. It was so fucking obvious they might as well have had the word bad guys carved into their foreheads. So, honestly, it wasn't that much of a surprise. But I won't give details on who they are because I don't want to spoil too much. It's just the principle. If you haven't seen it, I don't try to spoil it too much, regardless of how bad or good the movie is. And the action in this movie is feverishly bad. It's like a bunch of monkeys on cocaine and LSD edited it, because there's a cut literally every fraction of a second, and it's coupled with shaky cam, with zooming in and out, and it just makes for a fucking unpleasant experience. Now I will say I didn't mind the first action scene because it seems like they focused on that one a lot, and it's tolerable at best. The editing does dial it back a notch or two so you can somewhat still follow what's going on. However, after that chase is when the shit gets bad. And that's when the monkeys come into the picture and take over, and it gets progressively worse as it goes along. Not to mention the ridiculousness of the action in this movie is taken to new heights. People say that Die Hard 4 with John McClane standing on the wing of a fighter jet or launching a car up a ramp into a helicopter was too much. Well, once you see Die Hard 5, you will change your mind on that little issue for sure. In Die Hard 5, there's a scene where John McClane and Jack fall through like 20 levels of scaffolding and barely get scraped. Then they jump through a 10-story building window and not even know if anything will break their fall. And guess what? They survive. And then they fall through the floor of yet another building in slow motion while a wall of crappy CGI fire falls around them. Seriously, this movie has a fixation with people falling through shit. Oh, and you know how all the other Die Hards have at least one fight scene with John McClane and a henchman or henchwoman? Well, Die Hard 5 has no fight scene. Yep, it's like they totally forgot about it. No fight scene for John McClane. And the music in this film, once again, done by Marco Beltrami, is not that memorable. Die Hard 5 is a shamefully bad movie. As an action movie, it fails, and as a Die Hard movie, it has failed beyond belief. Bad acting, bad and confused writing, dreadful editing, poor characterization, and scenarios so implausible that it didn't work for the tone it was aiming for. And speaking of tone, this movie is rated R. While I was excited they went back to an R rating, they didn't really make much effort to make it clear that this is an R-rated movie. Sure, there's a couple of bloody headshots and some F-bombs, But aside from that, it's barely any more violent than Die Hard 4, and that was PG-13. This is the weakest R-rated action movie I've ever seen. The F-bombs, there's only a handful of them, and there's only a couple of bloody headshots. That's it. And it all feels forced. Die Hard 5 was made on a $92 million budget and grossed $304 million worldwide. It was financially successful, but I wonder why they cut down on the budget. Die Hard 4 was $110 million. I guess 20th Century Fox had a feeling that the script wasn't good and cut the budget by $18 million. And reception by fans and critics alike, Die Hard 5 was slaughtered, with a 5.3 out of 10 on IMDb and a 14% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. 14%! That is pathetic and downright embarrassing for a Die Hard film. I mean, the first Die Hard gets 92%, the second one gets 69%, the third one 51%, and the fourth one 82%. To go down to a 14% rating is abysmal. And according to Bruce Willis, I have heard they will be making one more Die Hard film and that will be the end of it. And so far, the title of the movie is Die Hard Year 1. At one stage it was called Die Hardest, but it sounded too much like Die Hard 2, Die Harder, so it was changed to Die Hard Year 1. And it may be an origin story, jumping back and forth between a young John McClane starting off in the New York Police Department to a present John McClane. And I'm not sure how to feel about this. For me personally, they should have a look at the movie Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood, which to me, that movie was Dirty Harry 6. But seriously, that's what it should be. Have John McClane retired and all of a sudden there is a siege in his neighborhood for whatever reason. And then have him take on the bad guys by himself, much like he did in the first two films. Also, they should play off the fact that he's old and he struggles with his abilities. To me, that sounds more compelling, and maybe have him go down in a blaze of glory. It should be a smaller scale film, not so focused on huge action scenes, but more on stealth and desperation and brutal firefights. Have some explosions, but it should be like an event rather than just having explosions for the sake of it. But overall, I give Die Hard 5 0 out of 5. That's right, never have I given a movie a score that low before. But to see a franchise like Die Hard go to such a new low, I think that score is fitting and fair. It's a flat-out disgrace to a great franchise. Well, that's my review of all the Die Hard films, folks. I hope you all liked it, and in the words of Mr. Takagi from Die Hard 1, I would like to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. See you later, folks.